Well, from one of the most talked about matters, cricket, to one of the least talked about commonly, the Northeast. And for that reason, so very important to turn our attention to the Northeast. Um, we mostly speak of the Northeast when something goes wrong, as it did sadly in Manipur of late. But of course, that's just not about the Northeast. There's so much of India that doesn't get talked about. How often do you hear conversations on Odisha or Himachal Pradesh, or even Karnataka, perhaps, when there's no election on? In Delhi, it's mostly about Delhi. But anyway, moving to London, we are all quite familiar with the royalty here. Of late, we've become familiar in rather unusual ways with the non-working royal. Today, we have with us a very working royal, Pradyot Manika. He is the head of the royal family in Tripura. He is familiar to us through his TED Talks, a very progressive voice in all of the Northeast, not just Tripura. And he heads the Tripura Motha, which is the Indigenous Progressive Regional Alliance. So it's very active. It's now the second largest political party in Tripura. And we have with us Rita Kakati-Shah, and she's founder and CEO of the UMA, and that is an organization that works to empower women and the minorities, and she has been doing this very innovatively, very successfully. Last year, she won the Lifetime Achievement Award from President Biden, and we'll soon see for ourselves why that was. And both our guests have joined us quite remarkably. Pradyot is just off a flight minutes back, straight from the airport. And Rita arrived this morning and heading back this evening to New York, where she lives. So very grateful to both of you for finding time for us, Pradyot and Rita. So Pradyot, tell us, the Northeast is, of course, not just one monolith. There's Tripura, Meghalaya, Assam, and Rita, of course, is from Assam. This is now spoken of perhaps even a little lazily as a monolith, but the particular interest that we have today is the Northeast as a destination for investment and as an area and as a partner for trade among the Northeastern states, trade the rest of India, the rest of the world. Do you see that coming along with any promise?
First of all, I hope I'm audible. Am I audible? Yeah. Yes. You know, when we talk about Northeast, generally people tend to look at it from a very binary point of view. There are 8 different states, over 80 different languages, different food, different customs, cuisines, and it's a continent on its own. It's something like an EU. When people from India, rest of India, they turn up in Northeast, they also feel sometimes they get a culture shock. So Northeast is extremely different from the rest of India. It is probably India's corridor to the ASEAN countries. And the idea of investment has to be different from the traditional setup. We have lovely mountains, forests, rivers, our wildlife, our flora and fauna are probably one of the finest and the most pristine, still untouched largely. So it is extremely important that we develop economic policy for our region which is not exploitative, which does not believe in only having coal mines, cement factories. It has to be completely different. And it is extremely unfortunate that I see a few friends here, Abhinandan is there, but most of the people would only talk about Northeast when the Chinese troops moved up, and they would say like, oh, India is in threat. And if there was militancy, then people paid attention. Now Manipur, because of the completely misrepresented in the national media, that there's a problem between tribals and non-tribals. Meiteis are locals, so are the Kukis. but the national media has made it into a tribal, non-tribal, Hindu, Christian conflict. It is not so. And the fact is that there has been a huge lack of communication and lack of interest, and that is because there was no connectivity. That has changed in the last few years, and I would not like to give any political party any credit for that, but I think that has changed because the government of India, whoever so it is, has realized that if you want a certain part of India to be integrated in the mind frame of the nation, then you need to develop highways, you need to develop airports, you need to develop telecommunications, and I think that's where Northeast is opened up.
Yes.
One last point which I want to point out is that Indians are extremely, I mean, I'm sorry if I say so, but we are extremely obsessed with Pakistan, Afghanistan. But the fact is that if India needs to do trade with its neighbors, the most successful neighbors are not on the west of India. It is on the east of India. Myanmar is there, Vietnam is growing, Thailand is growing, Bangladesh is booming. So if India needs to look at its trade policy, it will need to look at the ASEAN nations, and Northeast becomes the perfect platform for us to connect with the rest of India.
Yes, connectivity, Rita, of course, is not just about technology, it's about connecting with people, their hearts and minds, their views, what they believe in, what they believe they can do, and that's an area that you've been working very actively in. Do you think that kind of connectivity is also lacking, if not missing?
It's an interesting question. So my perspective is different. I am a second generation Assamese, so I was born and brought up in the UK, and I now live in the States. I'm in New York, and my kids are now third generation Assamese. So I came with a very, very different viewpoint in terms of that connectivity as a second generation, because my parents, other first generation parents that were immigrants in this country or any other country, when they left Assam or any other state in the Northeast, you're very strongly bonded with your culture. So a lot of my generation actually embedded some Assamese views that were kind of quite old school and not as modern as the current Assamese coming over to the UK or to the States. And growing up in the UK, we weren't known at school for, our rich textiles and things that now Assamese folks are known for. People would, if they'd even heard of Assam, would think, oh, that's where the tea comes from. Assamese tea is actually very popular in this country, and actually, I would argue, one of the most popular teas out there, especially for the royal family over here. So the connectivity was a lot through food, through living and growing up in the northeast of London. And East London, there's a very Eastern Asian population. So there was a lot of connectivity and sort of similarities there. And I think the way we bonded was very much from a minority background. When you feel you are in the lesser of any population, you sometimes take a back foot, but that could do two things. One, it could make your voice a little bit quieter. You could feel a little bit more inferiority complex sometimes. But the other thing it could do, it could make you more passionate about where you're from. It could make you have a stronger, louder, more extroverted voice. And I think that happened certainly with me and a lot of the other second generation I grew up with, in terms of thinking that how are we going to give back to our roots? How do we make sure everybody knows that, yes, I'm British by birth, I'm American now, but I'm an Assamese. First and foremost, I'm an Assamese. That is my roots, that is my heritage, and nobody can take that away from me. So I think connectivity for me is almost something of forever preaching to the world that I live in now about what is Assam. It's not just a land of textiles. It's not just where we have oil. It's not just where we have tea. It's not just where we have a huge growth in IT and infrastructure and entrepreneurship. It's where my heart is. It's where our heart is. You go to an Assamese house, you will be welcomed with love. You don't have that in the commercial aspects that you have in the rest of India. You have love, you have warmth, you have the beauty, you have the nature. So the connectivity is really where your heart is. So I would sort of sum up by saying that.
Pradyot, is there a significant minority issue? Now, in Manipur, of course, we heard a lot of comments. You suggest that some of these were, if not most of them, in the mainstream media were ill-informed, but some suggestions that minority issues played a part in this. Is this a significant issue in the northeastern states, and is there an interface between that and business and prosperity?
No, when you say minority, what is a minority?
Whoever.
No, because minority could be in population, minority could be linguistically, because in states like Northeast, you have 6 languages within one state. So you could be a linguistic minority, you could be an ethnic minority, you could be a religious minority. So the fact is that for a lot of people, minority means just religion.
Well, not just religion, it could be any of these. In fact, there would be an overlap. Minority is really when you perceive someone as someone from the minority, it's about a prejudice backed by some sort of selected statistics. Now, in that, I mean, one person's minority, one state's minority will be different from another's. So do you find these issues have an interface with prosperity?
I think these are irrelevant issues. To be very honest, I'm in politics myself. We make it an issue because we politicians want to ride on emotions and win an election because we haven't done enough work in these areas. So when you go up to your community and you say, oh, we have been discriminated because they have discriminated us. Minority issues happen with Gujar Jat violence. Why is it only in the Northeast? The Kuki-Meitei conflict is an artificial conflict created because the real issue was land. In Tripura, we have a different problem. In Meghalaya, it's Khasi, Garo, Jaintia. It is different. I don't think it affects prosperity. Eventually, who are the people who are suffering? Let's give you an example of Manipur. And I'm not playing to the gallery here. Houses were burned, people were murdered. But the real people who were behind this entire ill-planned, the behind-the-scene drama which took place were the ministers and the MLAs. None of their properties got affected. Did any of their cars get burned? Did any of their houses get burned? Who suffered? A daily wage earner who had probably no role in this conflict. So people realize, but then there are elements, there are non-state actors, there are state actors which actually benefit from short-term politics.
Well, that is always, the elites never suffer.
The elites actually, there are new elites now. Elites with values is different. Elites need not mean money, it could be intellectual capacity. But what you have today here, there is this new phrase, Lutyens Delhi, Lutyens Delhi. Who is Lutyens Delhi? Those who were Lutyens Delhi 10 years ago are out. Now Navika Kumar is Lutyens Delhi. So the fact is, nothing is static. So the people who have come in are people who have taken over seized power with no intention of actually bringing in development, will rake up these issues. It is incumbent on the younger generation, it is incumbent on stakeholders to shun this sort of hatred.
Yes.
Regarding prosperity, regarding development, I am not only a politician, I used to run a magazine. I have a hotel.
A very successful one.
No, we much like News Laundry. We were very successful in terms of our coverage. In terms of advertisement, we were nil. So that's why I sold it off to a politician eventually. And at a good price. And then I funded my own political party to defeat the same party, which funded me. I have a hotel in Shillong. It's an ancestral property. We started it on our own. It's not a chain, it's a hotel. I run it myself. And it's successful, and people are coming from rest of India and enjoying it. So, and there was a time when we started the hotel, the chefs were from outside, the general manager was from outside, even most of the staff had to come from outside. Today we have locals.
Yes.
So there is a lot of development happening. Unfortunately, something happens in Imphal and they say, oh, Northeast is burning. If Northeast is such a huge place, I mean, from Imphal to Agartala, it will take you 48 hours to reach by car. Something happens in Arunachal Pradesh and you say, oh, we can't go to northeast. Shillong and Arunachal Pradesh, it will take you, what, 30 hours by car?
Yes.
So it's a vast, if something happens in North Delhi, do we stop going to Delhi?
No, this is hardly reassuring, but this kind of othering is not related
South
only
India
to
is South India is burning.
Yes.
My God, there is South
Yes.
India is not just one entity.
So this kind of othering happens not just with Northeast, it happens with the South, it happens within these areas about other areas. But let me put it to you, Rita, since you've done a lot of work on minorities and on issues of empowerment and dignity, do you find issues around minoritism a particular problem in varying kinds, of course, in the Northeast, in Assam particularly, let's say, because that's what you're most familiar with?
Yeah, so actually, I have a slightly different take on the minority complex or minority issues, especially coming from, being born and brought up in the West as well. And I'll give you an idea. So in the US, and I've been in the US now for 12 years, when I first moved there were pockets of Assamese, like there are Assamese all over the world. But I certainly, bonded with different Indians that were in the States, and they had their own flourishing businesses, and they were educationists, and they represented many industries and backgrounds. And we'd talk about, I'm from Assam, that's my heritage and roots. And then they would explain to their children, oh, she's from Assam, remember that tribal place I told you about. Now, I mention that, might sound a little bit in jest, but when this person mentioned tribal, it wasn't mentioned as a geographical reference. It wasn't mentioned as do you remember I showed you that reference book and you saw all of these beautiful fauna and things. It was mentioned in a derogatory term, in a derogatory way. Assam, that place nobody's heard of. Assam, that place is on the other end of that tiny strip on the other side of Bangladesh. Assam, the place nobody talks about. Assam, the place is forever trying to get in the in crowd with us, but not there. So I mentioned that. That's not true with everybody, of course, but it is a big, big part. So when you are, as an Assamese, and whether you're second generation or even first generation, you have to find and fit in with your identity. Sometimes you're always faced with the question is, who am I? Where do I fit in? So to your point, Sanjay, a lot of the work I do is very much about finding that confidence and where do I fit in, owning that voice, owning who you are. Because
as a member of a perceived minority for someone.
Exactly. So it can do two things. It can make you kind of go on your back foot, as I mentioned earlier on. But the other thing it can do, and this is the hidden gem, is that it can really, really make you so much more confident and you own your worth so much more. And this is the work that, through my company Uma and also personally, that I really rested a lot of time in doing. How can you own that voice, own that thought, so people know what is Assam, what is the Northeast, what is the richness of there that actually, turning it around. Now I'm trying to turn it around so people want to go there. I'm trying to work with, the tourism boards and work with the hoteliers. Maybe we should chat afterwards about how do we get people to really admire Assam. It's not the same as, when in the US in particular, people think of India, they think of Bollywood. Right? They think of festivals, think of celebrations. Everybody over there celebrates Diwali, right? Assamese people celebrate Diwali. Assamese people celebrate Durga Puja. We go to other people's festivals. How many people come to our Bihu? We have 3 Bihus in the year. We struggle to get people to just one. So there are festivals, but it's very much the same. We are always on the back foot. So I think with the minority thing, it's a lot more effort it feels, but I think collaboratively now with conferences such as this and forums like this, it's a lot easier to open up that dialogue and encourage more people to come and visit us.
Speaking about investment and growth, Pradyot, where do you see the promise?
Can I come back to what you were saying?
Please.
By the way, Bihu we call it Buisu. It's the same time. In Punjab is Baisakh. In North India is Baisakh, South India. So it's basically a cultural thing. But when you're talking about tribal, largely Assam is not tribal. Karbis are tribal, Dimasas and Bodos. I'm a tribal. And many times people have come and said, oh, but you are a son of a king. How can you be tribal? I said, sir, not everyone is a Rajput. Right? The fact is, I'm a tribal. And there are 2 ways of looking at a tribal thing. One, where people look at you with a sense that these are uncivilized people. And the other, which I find more offensive, is yaar tum to income tax nahi pay karte ho. Because we tribals are exempted in 6 scheduled areas of not paying taxes. Both ways, a lot of people feel that this group of people, the tribals, have got enough privileges and the time has come for their privileges to go. Not realizing that it took 60 years before our state got a first central university. Not realizing that when you land in Agartala, your first mobile network would be Bangladesh mobile signal, not your own countries, because we didn't have it. If you have to, many people in this country are against reservations. But the fact is that there are imbalances. Now, is reservation the way to go ahead? I'm not sure. Maybe there are better ways. But till the time those better ideas do not come, you cannot shun a group of people saying, oh, you have been privileged. Now, taking what you have said, you've felt a sense of discrimination at some point. I felt it too. My cousins grew up in Delhi, Jaipur. They used to play polo and I used to play football. They would listen to classical music and listen to Beethoven and Bhimsen Joshi. I grew up listening to Guns N' Roses because our culture was different. So many times I've also felt, they felt that we were inferior. It happens in all strata. But it makes you stronger. It makes you different. It gives you more conviction. So today, when you walk into a room, you are confident of being a person who did not go by the norms. You are confident of who you are. You take pride in eating with your hands and fingers. You take pride in your cuisine. Some people call our food smelly. I love my bamboo shoot and smoked pork and dry fish. I have no problem. So, when a community becomes confident of their identity and not jingoistic, which is the big problem in India, rhetoric and jingoism will take you nowhere because that leads to ignorance. But when you become aware and when you become confident of who you are, you understand your culture, then you walk into a room and you are comfortable in your skin, you do not pretend to be anybody else. And that's where your second point comes, prosperity. Prosperity will come when a region is confident of who they are. I feel that this generation is confident in where they would like to go.
So is this, I mean, to repeat this a little obstinately, do you find that this perception has an interface with development, with investment, growth and prosperity? How do those indices of growth and well-being relate with the kind of perceptions you're describing?
I'll stick my neck out. In the next 10 years, Northeast will outgrow most of the bigger Indian states, including Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, West Bengal. Northeast will outgrow them because I think the talent pool in Northeast, the language, I didn't study in England, I didn't study in New Delhi, I studied in Shillong, and I think we speak pretty well. The region, because it was untapped, can learn from the mistakes of the other big Indian cities. Our energy sector, again, Northeast, we talk about tea, but we are floating on oil, we are floating on gas, we are floating on minerals. Uranium is there as well, but which we are not, we wouldn't like to go there. But the fact is that we are very mineral rich. Now the fact is, our energy sector, hydel projects. Energy sector is something which we can actually not only be self-sufficient, we can actually even sell it to Bangladesh, which is energy deficit, which is growing as a country. So Northeast, I will stick my neck out and say in the next 10 years, if we are sitting here in 2033, Northeast's time would have come.
And may it come, and may it come sooner.
And so I'm asking all of you to come and visit the place and invest if you would like to, because saturation has already happened in many parts of India. But in our area, there is not only potential, there is willingness for people to come and invest in our part of the world.
Rita, we are talking about a link here between confidence and growth. That confidence in growth, of course, will come from what opportunities people can tap into, whether it's oil, minerals, and there's so much that education can make possible. Is there a shortfall in confidence? Is there something people need to do to be confident, to tap these resources that they're sitting on?
It's a great question, and I actually 100% agree with what Pradyot said about, the confidence is in the heart of when you think about prosperity and growth. So it's about recognizing that, and I think with Assam and the Northeast, that has come now. So I know he boldly said 10 years. I would even say that even less than, hopefully, because
if you say 10 years, then it happens earlier better.
Exactly, yeah. Because entrepreneurship is on the rise, right? Entrepreneurship is the future. We have younger and younger generation of excellent thought leaders out there that are coming from the Northeast, that are coming from Assam and the other of the seven sister region out there that are excellent in their ideas and thoughts. And it's not just using Assamese resources. It's not just thinking, okay, we have untapped resources here. It's about what is that missing formula? What is a problem we can see because we've been a minority for so long that others around India that the rest of the world are not seeing? What is it that the rest of the world are craving right now that we can try and fix that, plug that gap, plug that hole? And entrepreneurship is a huge part and access for growth in the future. So I think it is coming soon. But the other piece to that is, and we spoke a little bit about this earlier, is that when you question somebody from the current generation, so I'm not talking about my generation, more like, generation younger than me, you ask, where are you from? And nowadays, the question doesn't beckon a very straightforward answer. It's not so much like, oh, I come from, this country or that state. It's more like, maybe it's this town, maybe it's that. A lot of people call themselves global citizens these days. And why? Because people identify as having many roots, many identities, having many tastes. See, I grew up loving Guns N' Roses too, but having many sort of eclectic and worldly tastes and viewpoints, and everybody wants to change the world nowadays. Everyone is thinking about sustainability, how to make an impact personally as well. Assamese and Northeastern people are at the forefront of that because they're where the raw resources are. And it's a matter of really connecting them with fellow tradespeople, business leaders, government officials in other countries to make that happen. So in the past, where it's been very, very difficult because of a geographical connection, because of a poor broadband connection, it's becoming a lot easier now because there are people that are actually pushing for this connection to happen, to make this global citizenship a reality.
Well, speaking of nuts and bolts here, what do you see, Pradyot, as the 3 areas for immediate growth that will lead to the target you are seeing 10 years down the line? What is it? Is it minerals? What minerals? Who is going to tap them? Is it going to be local business people? Is it going to be investors from the rest of India, from countries outside of India? Who will invest in what? What kind of growth in which area?
I think energy sector, definitely.
And what is the source of energy we're talking about?
We're talking about hydel projects. We're talking about gas. We're talking about thermal energy. We are also talking about oil. Because
hydro energy takes a long time. You were talking about building of dams. Other than the controversy around that.
No, I think a large part of Northeast is also uninhabited. So if you're looking at parts of Arunachal Pradesh, if you're looking at one of the biggest success was the Umyam Lake, which the Japanese constructed in 1960s for the town of Shillong, which is actually the lifeline. So these are uninhabited areas, and there is no displacement of people, because I would never want my tribes to be displaced from their route of origin for a big project like that. These are snow-fed rivers again in Arunachal, so there, Sikkim again.
So you're talking about dams being built in Arunachal?
Already there. Because
and the growth will come from?
And then again, I'm talking about energy sector, I'm talking about hospitality sector. If you go anywhere in India, you would see most of the people in the hospitality sectors are from Nagaland, Manipur, Tripura, Meghalaya. These are our boys and girls. I'm not talking about boys, boys and girls who are there in the hospitality sector, in the nursing sector.
Yeah, but in hospitality, Pradyot, we're talking about people migrating, doing probably underpaid work. Let's talk about what is happening within the Northeast. Are we going to get money coming in to multiply money in?
So I'll give you an example. We growing up in our part of the world, I'm not that old, but I'm pretty over the hill. Now you have a Marriott, now you have Taj coming all over the Northeast. You've got a Novotel. These are big brands in India, by the way. You've got the Park coming in. You've got the hotel industry flourishing.
Tourism.
Tourism is flourishing.
Yes.
AIMS has come up. Our nursing sector, the medical sector, many people from Bangladesh go all the way to Chennai for treatment. They go all the way to Vellore for treatment. Bangladesh is just a few kilometers away from parts of Tripura, parts of Meghalaya, parts of Assam. These people would rather come to our part of the world. The weather is great, and if we can develop a good health infrastructure,
yes,
it would be wonderful. Another area,
yes,
because see again, success means empowering the younger generation, because they are the ones who will spend money. The money needs to be rotating around the economy. If I spoke about English, we all grew up, Northeast being parts of hill station, we all grew up with the role of the missionary schools, and we all grew up in the Northeast. And today, if you go to any part of the Northeast, most likely you're going to meet people who are very well conversant in English. The call centers, the entire with the broadband connectivity improving, our people are far more conversant in English. So again, this is an area where we can grow. Of course, there are other things where we should also put our efforts in, but I think if we can identify 4 to 5 core areas where you can create employment, because many times we speak about great industries which create no employment. If the families are not getting enough money, you will create a growth of 3 or 4 industrialists, but you will not create a growth of a community. Employment will come from these areas.
Yes,
so that is what,
yes,
I think is the area where one can look at.
Yes, tourism certainly sounds promising. Energy,
nursing,
tourism, nursing, healthcare. I mean, what you pointed to as a possibility
IT.
that this should be a healthcare center,
Yeah,
attracting people from the eastern region outside of India.
absolutely.
This sounds most promising. Yes, certainly.
Manipur is becoming an international airport. Tripura already has become, the new airport is at much better than most of the airports in the rest of India, better than Terminal 1 in Delhi. Guwahati is becoming international airport. So you are again creating connectivity. So there is, in fact, Guwahati, you do fly to Singapore, I think in Bhutan, and we're trying to connect to Bangladesh. Maybe to Thailand is being connected, Bangkok is being connected. So you are creating connectivity.
Yes. Rita, how do you see the position of women in the Northeast? Women clearly are very educated, very aware, and is that a resource for themselves primarily, for their families, but also for the states they live and work in? Do you see that this is an advantage that the northeastern states have that they can build on?
Yeah, no, so if you think of the rest of India, known to be a very patriarchal society. The Northeast, on the other hand, we are known to be matriarchal. And one of those evidences is in the education system. So as Pradyot mentioned, education starts from childhood, starts younger. The average rate of graduation, boys and girls, is 70% women versus 30% boys in Assam and the Northeast area. That is huge. In the West, in the US, it's 53% women to men. And in the UK, it's roughly 51, 49%. So we are ahead of the curve when it comes to thinking about the matriarchy and having female graduates and women out there really on the forefront of the future, the economy, creating the country's future GDP. It's really, really a part there. But then what happens is, you know, life-changing events happen, marriage being one of them, and then suddenly that 70-30% goes to roughly 50-50. Early days of marriage, you know, both partners are working, you know, the men and the women. And then the next life-staging event happens in quite often if people choose to have children after that, that then 50-50 goes down to 25% women that stay in the workforce. And of that 25%, some of them leave the state, leave the country. Why? To continue their careers. The others that don't and want to go into different facets, and caregiving is also a career, and homemaking is also a career because you are learning life skills and skills that absolutely are dependent on what happens in the future of your generations. But that dynamic changes. So then later on, years pass, and then some of these women that have now been homemakers for many, many years, so that part of that 75% that dropped off of the salaried workforce early on, and they take up other industries. They think, what are we going to do from our own homes that we can add to our family income? And one of them could be, you know, packaging pickles. One of them could be, okay, let me get into textiles. One of them could be, well, I come from Hualkusi, the silk capital, I would argue, in the eastern of the world, actually. And it's, and people get into these trades, family trades, but they're small to start with. But it's for independence as a woman, and that's a big, big part of this women empowerment issue right now. But the other part is getting financial independence. And I would argue that is not quite where it should be at the moment. By financial independence, I mean not just earning money, but earning money that you can use and you're banking yourself. In a lot of cases, 90% actually in the Northeast, and actually not much better stats in the rest of India, women who earn, it goes into family finances, and they don't have the say in what happens to that money afterwards. And unfortunately, if you don't have that say, you're not in control, and that empowerment isn't there. So it's really, I would say, a holistic approach to how do you cope with gender equality and women empowerment. There are so many facets that are involved. There's societal viewpoints, there's policy out there, flexibility, there is thinking about how families can come together and share the load when it comes to bringing up the next generation. So it's not just seen as a female-only responsibility or a mother's responsibility only about how her children perform in school, but it's a family responsibility to bring them up. Until these actually change, unfortunately, we're going to have a little bit of a backlog and a slowdown in progress there.
And do you think this backlog is coming primarily from cultural restraints within society, or do you think it's primarily lack of opportunity out there?
I think the opportunity is there. You have to find the opportunity. And I think one good thing about Assam is people, we are quite outspoken, especially the women out there. We do say we speak our mind. We are bold. We are coming from that minority background. We are passionate about who we are. But getting the opportunities and getting that connection later on, mentoring is a huge part of that. Having somebody that maybe is of a senior or an established background that can actually champion and support a female in industry to make those introductions, to make those connections, to say, you know what, I'm going to introduce you to somebody that has this factory in Bahrain or in Dubai or in the States that I think would be a great connection for you to think about how do we internationalize your offering here. Unless those happen, not much is happening. But I think Assam is one of the greatest places for it to happen. It is starting to happen through entrepreneurship. It's just a matter of time where it really, really takes off.
Pradyot, you know, the critical decision point for enabling all this is political. Whether it's energy that you spoke of, the boost in tourism, the healthcare hub for the region, are political decisions, do you think, being taken or likely to be taken to really make all this happen?
Actually, to be very honest, I think in our part of the world, it's society which largely drives the political narrative. You will see one day you are in Congress, and in center BJP comes, the entire political narrative goes to BJP. So there is no such thing called, in most parts of, I mean, if you look at Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland, even if you look at Meghalaya, politics often is not as what you would see in the rest of India. Political will. Now, for that, I think that because we are so small as economies, we are so small as states, political will has to come from center. And here, I would not like to, being in London, I wouldn't like to say much more than that.
That but doesn't sound very promising, does it?
No, no, it does, actually. From the time of Rajiv Gandhi, when he started by creating Mizoram, Arunachal Pradesh, I mean giving union territories to states, to now with the Udan scheme which has come in under the Prime Minister Modi, where connectivity has vastly improved. There has been efforts. Are 100% of those ideas completely implemented on the ground? No. But I do see, maybe for whatever reason, maybe it has got to do with the China factor, but you do see impetus by respective governments of India now on the region, and I wouldn't like to play the discrimination card. One thing which is very interesting, which I found, which may be of some use to you, is I'm in the council, I'm in the government, and we have tied up with small financing banks. And you know, before, as you said rightfully, though most of the northeast is matriarchal, it is in lip service, because Nagaland just had for the first time 2 women MLAs since independence. Though while we say we are a very open society, we haven't given women chance. My political party is the first regional political party which is given, which has got 2 MLAs. We never had it. We didn't even give them tickets. Mizoram is the same problem. Meghalaya, which is completely matriarchal, is great in the family household, but when it comes to administrative decisions of politics, they're not given space. But when I've been talking to all these small financing banks, 95% of these small financing banks come to us and say, sir, we would like to give soft loans for entrepreneurship, but not to the men. We would like to give it to the women because they tend to be better in repayment, because their outlook is repayment. They are better in repayment, and they are more sincere. We guys tend to end up having good times after the sun sets. But the fact is that things are changing. Are they changing fast? I'm not sure. But coming back to the politics, do you give credit to the politician for why Northeast is changing? I would say, please don't give us too much credit. The change is happening because the people want the change. We politicians will only follow the trend. We do not make the trends there. The people themselves want to change. Many of our people are in Delhi, in Bangalore, in Hyderabad, in Mumbai, and they've seen the rest of India boom and grow. And now they want to come back and they want to do the same thing. And there are opportunities coming up. I also, when I see someone like her, I've never met her before, but someone who's been for most of her life outside Assam, to see someone so committed. There are many people like her who would like to come back. I think it's for us to give them the platform rather than us setting the narrative. We are not competent enough to set the narrative as politicians. We should allow entrepreneurs, we should allow people who are in the field of business to come and start. We should be facilitators and not be involved in actually running the business.
Yeah, absolutely. Pradyot, you are a political leader. It's not unusual.
I thought I was an activist.
It's not unusual for political leaders or activists to say that they're only following the wishes of the people. I would like to know one politician who has not said that. This is appropriate to say, but we are talking about decisions, and decisions potentially about big money, about investment that is considerable. We are going to have a healthcare hub in the northeastern states for the entire eastern region, that part of the world. This is hugely promising. But a lot of people will doubt whether the political leaders and the governments will get their act together for this.
See, I'll give you another example. The government of India, many things, because we are under the government of India. The government of India, under various governments, whether it was the Congress, whether it was the Janata Party or the BJP today, have a policy of not allowing certain countries to invest in the Northeast because of the historical or because of the geographical position that Northeast is in. So you would see many decisions eventually lie with the government of India. If a Chinese company would like to come and set up an Oppo or a Huawei in Northeast, they would probably have to get some clearances from the government of India. because Northeast is also in a unique position. We have China on one side, we have Bangladesh on another side, we have Myanmar on the other side, and we are surrounded. There is only the chicken's neck which connects Northeast, which is roughly 23, 25 kilometers with the rest of India. So there is a thought process that we need to filter out on certain nations, certain companies who would like to come to the Northeast and invest. But if you see over the last 5 years, the Japanese investment has grown, JICA has come in. You see that in the education, in the AIMS coming up in Guwahati itself is a big achievement. You see the creation of airports coming up. So I think the government of India's policy has changed. There was a time when there was a policy that let's not make airports, because if we make airports, the invading forces, China could probably come in and use our airports to go deeper into India. But now, the government of India's policy, not this, it's since the time of Manmohan Singh, has been that let us develop Northeast, because if we don't develop Northeast, then obviously there will be a sense of neglect and isolation, which will not help the own citizens of the region.
I don't know if it is, talking of building airports, I don't know if it is a certain gentleman doing all of them. But last word to you, Rita. Very interesting to hear from Pradyot that banks are saying they would prefer to lend to women. That seems an amazingly positive sign, and Pradyot is in the thick of it. He knows exactly what he's saying. Do you see a promise, not just for development, but also for women?
I think, in short, yes. But if I could just quickly add to the response that Pradyot made, I know we talked about, society and politics almost going hand in hand. One influence, I would actually say there's 4 factors that influence change and ultimately what happens to women's success. So one of them is society. We're all part of our different societies, whether it's short societies, our communities that we live in, our broader environmental societies, groups that we're parts of, anything like that. The second part is policies. The laws that are set, things that are mandated, things that are suggested, those form part of what you do. If somebody tells you you have to do something, you have to do it, or you get in trouble if you don't. The third part of that is what happens in the workplace. So we talked about banks, we talked about finance, and we talk about corporates, which are somewhat separate to anything that taxpayers fund, but it's a very influential part of what happens in society. So everything goes hand in hand. And then the fourth part, and I would almost argue the heart of all of this, is education. Now, within education, you're talking about educators from childhood. You're also talking about, colleges, secondary school, universities later on. But also in education, I'm going to put media in that, media. Because media is a big part. Anything that influences the public is educating them. Especially in this day and age with the use of digital media, artificial intelligence, and so many different forms of getting news in our education, it's a very important part of how people get educated. So I think everybody has a responsibility, but these are the 4 aspects, I think, without which things can't progress. And when we talk about, empowering women, all of these 4 aspects of the societies that we live in have to go hand in hand. Whether it's through advertising, through marketing, role models out there, through certain policies, through bank loans that are out there, whatever it is, but all of them have to be part of that.
Thank you. Speaking as a member of the media, I do think that if anybody is expecting us to educate them, they'll be in big trouble. But thank you very much, Rita. Thank you very much, Pradyot. And If
I can just say something regarding media. We grew up, I remember in my childhood, we would wait with my father, I remember, it would be Sunday and we would get Friday's edition of Telegraph in Shillong. We had to wait for two days to get a newspaper, and we would then go and look at the sports page and then read about the politics of the world. But there was a time when media didn't pass on an opinion, gave an independent point of view. What I have seen right now, when we started this conversation about Manipur, when you spoke about tribals and non-tribals and Christians and non-Christians and Hindus, Muslims, what I've seen is that if we politicians have been accused of having one of the most uneducated people coming into politics. I've seen educated journalists, I'm not talking about you definitely, sir.
You do, please.
But I've seen people who have overnight changed their entire attitude, because eventually the only people who need independent funding in our country is the media, because I think the media today definitely has taken the prime time slot from Sunny Deol and come on to the national. I mean, there's so much of rhetoric, there's so much of misinformation, and there is so much of bashing of your opponents that you don't look at the weaknesses within. India is a great country, we have great strength, but our strength definitely is not in finding faults in our neighbors or in other communities. We should be looking at pointing out where we can improve ourselves. And this at no point should be a criticism towards our country. We love our country, but we want our country to become even better. And that can happen when, what she rightly said, is media is a part of our democracy. Judiciary is a part of a democracy. Society is a part of a democracy. All four need to work in tandem. Otherwise, we will have hiccups along the way.
On media, we shall have another discussion another time, and a troubled one, but please, quick word from you before we wind up.
Yeah, I have a question. Regarding Northeast, two quick questions.
Microphone.
Sorry. I've traveled extensively in the Northeast. I was working. Sorry, I'll just.
Mic off ho gaya.
Hello? Yeah. Two quick questions. One is, I've traveled to all the Seven Sisters and Sikkim over years, over about a decade and a half, because I used to make shows. How do you balance, I mean, I've seen many states in the Northeast from 2003 when I started making regular trips there to the last, major one I made in maybe 2015, 14, 15. While there has been development from the first time I went to now, how do you avoid the mistakes, for example, that Mussoorie, Shimla made, where, I mean, coming back from Cherrapunji, I mean, from Bada Pani, down to Guwahati took me less time than just crossing Shillong.
Town itself, yeah.
It was, so how do you kind of do that balance? And coming to how the rest of India perceives the Northeast, we have an annual event in Delhi called the Media Rumble. And we ensure there's representation across all panels. It's not like gender panel will have women, Northeast panel will have Northeast. When you're talking economics, there should be journalists from the Northeast, there should be women, etc. While we try to do that, every year I get criticism from someone in the audience, and that, oh, that person you called is from the dominant tribe. How is it representative? It's not. So you can never get it right. Is there a certain problem of, people within the Northeast alienating allies by criticizing even attempts at that inclusivity because that is a dominant tribe? Because we don't know the politics within, So these are two grays. How would you negotiate, not repeat the mistakes of earlier hill states? And is that happening? Because I've seen it's, out of control. And the second, not alienating allies, yet being able to say that this is not truly representative of my Northeast.
So your second question, I would like to answer first, because it's a problem, I know. They'll say, hey Abhinav, why did you call that? He or she does not represent us, we are different. That's a genuine problem. Many people say, she is from Assam. Assam is the most big brother of Northeast and they dominate us. That happens. The fact is, I think, at some point we, within our own region, also need to realize it may not be a Pradyot who's from Tripura or herself from Assam who need to speak for a state. It could be a gentleman right there. It could be someone from Haryana, could be someone from Bristol, could be someone from New Jersey, could be someone from Chennai. So for all of us, we need to understand sometimes the best solution does not come from within. It can even come from an independent or a person from outside, because an outside perspective is important. So when we do invite them, I think we should invite people who can have an objective point of view rather than just community representation. I think that is very important. Second part, the first part which you spoke about, the traffic and the congestion, I completely agree. I went to Mussoorie. My mother studied there, so she said, "Beta, come and see Mussoorie." And I went there and I was appalled. I thought Shillong was bad, Mussoorie is even worse. The fact is that haphazard growth is very dangerous. So this is something which I've learned from Europe. I think creating small satellite towns where not everybody rushes into one town is very important. It's very important to have self-sustaining smaller towns which is around the outskirts of the major city, so that congestion doesn't take place. And for that you need proper town planning, you need a proper urban authority, and you need to create laws. One thing which is good is that the region being a high seismic zone, we have not created high rises, and now newer laws are coming into place, and for once the courts have actually also played a big role in creating. In fact, this is the sad part, is that the courts have to intervene and say that please leave this much gap between the roads and the houses and the construction. So there is a move to create more greener spaces within specifically if you speak about Shillong. And where we are in power, we have created a new bylaw where we do not go above 3 floors, and there has to be gaps between buildings so that the fire safeties are involved. We need to have breathing spaces. Our youngsters are battling something because Myanmar is very close, drugs. So it's very important to create impetus on healthy living. Healthy living can happen with jogging tracks, cycling tracks, sports. So we are trying to do that. And I believe that you will see this in the new townships which are coming up. What has already happened, that is something which we cannot undo, because that is already there. But there is a definite effort to make our part of the world, to maintain it as a beautiful part, because we do not want to end up like a Mussoorie or a Ooty. That is rightfully said.
Any last quick thought, please?
Thanks, Pradyot. Kind of just following up on what Abhinandan said and some of the things that you mentioned about resources in the Northeast. I work in Nagaland. I work in a very remote part of Nagaland called Kifri district. How do you reconcile this neoliberal ideas of growth and extractive nature of resources with indigenous and tribal identity in these regions, especially when the identity is so closely linked to land and the ecological security of that land?
So when you say resources, there is something called scientific approaches to doing it. If you grew up in Shillong,
Yeah.
the rat hole mining is not the way ahead. So the NGT came in, and they actually, the Supreme Court has come up with this new proposal of scientific mining. There is no harm in doing scientific mining, which is not a problem, because resource in the Northeast, in the 6th schedule area, does not belong to the government. It belongs to the tribes, the individuals, which is great, because then you actually benefit from it. Now, the idea is to educate, which he rightfully said, to educate, to make people realize that if you exploit the land where you live in haphazardly, you may have immediate benefit but long-term hazards. And that's why it is very important that we ourselves start creating enough think tanks, creating enough. That's why we said it cannot happen from within. We need to create, people like you need to go and educate people like us need to educate and say that slow and steady wins the race. Let's not rush and make a mess of this. And I think it is happening. I know that people sometimes say, why are you so optimistic, why are you so thing? But the fact is, should I lead an Andolan to stop it? No. We need to inform. Even the timber ban. There was a time when the entire hills were, and then the Supreme Court came in 1991 and stopped felling of trees. But today, if you see parts of Russia, Canada, there are scientific ways of reforestation after you use the timber in a certain area. So what we need to do is learn from certain things from other people as well, other parts of there are other liberal economies, other nations, we can learn from them and implement it in our area. Not everything indigenous needs to be accepted. We have to keep our minds open and we have to learn from other countries and other thought processes as well.
If I can
To
just
wind up,
quickly-
yes, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I just
please?
wanted to add actually to both the questions. I think everything discussed, basically it's your infrastructure, the foundation, right? And there's a couple of equations here. So I love the point about, forming some sort of a think tank. Think global citizenship. We spoke about this concept earlier. A global think tank, something that is unique to the areas in the Northeast that have the infrastructure issues right now that we're facing, knowing that in the West as well, I mean, I come from the New York area, I spend a lot of time in Los Angeles, they are disasters when it comes to traffic and things like that. But they're trying to do something about it. So you think about what is it, who are these urban planners, who are these sort of architects, who are these green, sustainable thinkers that you can bring as part of this think tank to keep in line with the specific region that you're in, to bring together what's worked, what hasn't worked. There are certain park and rides, where you are not allowed to drive in the city in some places, where you have to park the car. There is a specific only bus lane. You come on and it's a frequently run service. You have to make the rail system better. You have to think, okay, if I'm not bringing my car in to add the traffic, what are the alternatives? So these are hand-in-hand huge projects that have to take place. It's not just sort of let's just fix the roads or let's fix the lights. It's not that. It's okay, what are the other transport systems? And what else? The more you do this, you have to think about how green is this? How much is it going to be helping the environment? Can we get more electric vehicles, a new buzzword of the West right now, out there in the Northeast? And it could do hugely well out there, in which case, how are we going to do that, especially given some power cut issues? So we have to think about these sort of tacts over there. But then the other part is, how do we fund it? Everything costs money, and a lot of money. These projects, even in the West, now we're in London, the Elizabeth line, our most recent line over here, took years of planning and went way over budget few times before we have what we have now. So even things like that, you have to think these things cost a lot of money. I wouldn't rush with any planning discussions. Take your time, think about where is that budget, seek that extra budget up front if you can, but you have to plan it well, plan it early, so you don't have to redo it again in 5 years' time.
Well, we really now have no time for anything but a thank you. Thank you, Rita, Pradyot. I certainly got a very acute sense over the last 45 minutes or so how much we miss when we turn our attention away from the Northeast. Fascinating what's happening. It's been most educative, most enlightening to hear from both of you. Thank you very much.